Jonathon Brooks, Ladd McConkey, and Zack Moss have seen their ADPs drop like a rock. Should you be buying in your Dynasty leagues? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. And joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Yahoo Fantasy. On today's show, we're taking a look at three players who have seen a massive drop in their ADPs over the last week, and we'll debate whether you should or shouldn't be buying them in your Dynasty leagues. Okay, let's start with Jonathon Brooks, because we actually got some somewhat surprising news about Jonathon Brooks that when he was drafted, all the reports were going to be he's going to be ready for training camp. He'll be ready for week one. Now it seems like that's not going to be the case. There was a report, I believe, from Dave Canales that just said, we're looking at week 3, week 4 for his return of the regular season. Are you scared off of buying Jonathon Brooks now that we know he's going to miss at least a couple games?
Absolutely not. And that's for a couple of reasons. And just to be clear, started camp on the PUP list. I don't think anybody expected him to play through the preseason or anything, risk aggravating an injury there. I think, the outcome here was pretty much what I expected. Might even start the season on the PUP list, which is interesting. That would put him out for at least the first 4 games of the season. But again, I want to say that we knew this guy coming out of college had a torn ACL. In the pre-draft process, knew he had a torn ACL. We knew where things stood, right? And we knew the timeline. We knew everything that we were getting in Jonathon Brooks. But we knew what we were getting from him before the injury, averaging 6.1 yards per carry, 1,100 rushing yards, 10 touchdowns, had some work as a receiver in his first season at Texas as the sole running back without Bijan Robinson in the backfield. This was one of the most well-rounded running back prospects in this class. And maybe that wasn't all that hard to do, all that hard of an accomplishment to feat. But I just think all in all, we have to look at Jonathon Brooks without any injury consideration at all. He's young. He's on an ascending offense. And I think there's going to be a couple things that fantasy managers are probably going to see once we get a taste of the Dave Canales offense here with the Panthers. I think we're going to see some improvements. I think it's really hard to picture the Carolina Panthers looking better than they did last year, but let's be honest, it couldn't have looked worse. But Bryce Young, I think, is probably set to take a step forward. They've got some more help at wide receiver. There's a lot of things that trended up. They made some moves on the offensive line. I do think once people see that this isn't going to be the deepest, darkest depth of offensive torment, that the light bulb's going to tick and they're going to say, ooh, Jonathon Brooks could have a pretty nice ceiling here in this offense, even if it's not the Chiefs, even if it's not the Bills. There's going to be opportunity here, and Jonathon Brooks is just a very talented running back.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And on top of this, missing weeks, let's say it's first 4 weeks of the season, are the most inconsequential weeks of your fantasy season, right? The first 4 weeks are the least valuable weeks of your fantasy season, right? So if Jonathon Brooks could be healthy going into, let's say, week 8 and beyond, that's all that you really care about anyways, right? As you make your push for the postseason, right? So it's why I don't overreact to weeks 1 through 4 that much if he doesn't play, because you also will have a deeper roster at that point. There's no bye weeks in the first 4 weeks of the season. You're just going to have more depth. It just doesn't concern me all that much. Now, I understand it in a redraft league because, okay, you're only playing 16 weeks and he's going to miss at least a fourth of those weeks, a fourth of those weeks. And then you're going to have the bye. So 5 of the 16 weeks, he's going to be unplayable for you. But in a dynasty league, you don't really care about the first 4 weeks of a 4-year rookie contract all that much. It's just a drop in the jug of water, right? So it just doesn't stress me out that much. In fact, Kate, you can make an argument this is actually good for Jonathon Brooks, right? The Panthers aren't going to overwork him. They want him to be 100% healthy. They clearly have his best interest in mind for the long term, right? So they're trying to make sure that he doesn't re-injure this again. There's no setbacks. I'm still buying, and if the price continues to drop, I'm all in.
Yeah, I'm still all in. There's not really much of a question mark for me. Jonathon Brooks, a top 10 dynasty running back, regardless of the pup, regardless of any of that. And I do like the way that they're approaching this because it is not just let's throw him to the fire. It's we really like this guy and we want him to be the focal point of our offense when he's fully healthy and ready to do so. Something else I want to consider with Jonathon Brooks in terms of maybe this being the right time to buy. Once we start seeing another look at this Carolina Panthers depth chart, which we saw last year, right? It wasn't good. It wasn't pretty. There was points in the season where, Chuba Hubbard was a viable flex play just based on volume. But all in all, I think we can argue that once we come out and see what the running backs look like without Jonathon Brooks, I think it's going to be even more clear than it is in our brains right now that there's no competition on this roster. It will be Brooks's team. And I think, yeah,
do we think Miles Sanders gets moved at some point this year?
Realizing that, watching the games and seeing it play out in real time.
Do we think Miles Sanders gets moved at some point?
I guess the question is who wants him? Where does he go?
I could see.
And I don't think it matters either way. I don't really think, I know touches are touches, but the quality of those touches, I think, are going to be so insignificant that it's probably going to be hard to generate touches for him. It's probably going unless if Jonathon Brooks is healthy eventually,
which you will be.
Yeah, I just don't see the threat of a Miles Sanders. So regardless of whether or not he's moved, it doesn't really budge the needle for me because he's a non-factor. Maybe I'm too harsh.
No, I don't think Miles Sanders is a factor at all, but I do think if they can get him out of there, it just opens up this backfield even more. Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think anything Miles Sanders does is going to impact Jonathon Brooks. So we are buying Jonathon Brooks. But what about Ladd McConkey, who is dealing with several injuries now in training camp? Are you still buying the Chargers rookie receiver? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's the formula for winning championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're guaranteed to be burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insights to the best fantasy draft strategies so that you can win your redraft leagues this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Kate, let's talk about Ladd McConkey, who was a pre-draft favorite of both of ours. He has seen his ADP go down 3 spots over the last 7 days, and it's down about 10 spots over the last month. Are you concerned about Ladd McConkey now that he's dealing with yet another injury?
He's dealing with an injury. His quarterback's dealing with an injury. There are a lot of different components here that I think are leading to the decreasing price for Ladd McConkey. I might be like the eternal optimist here, and maybe this is me with my blinders on in terms of just loving Ladd McConkey as a prospect, but I'm not falling on him. And maybe this goes back to again, just like how much I loved his tape. He never broke out at Georgia, but like advanced metrics were very friendly to him. 82nd percentile PFF receiving grade in 2023, 90th percentile separation percentage, 77th percentile yards per route run. You love to see contested catch rate in the 75th percentile, especially considering the fact that he's not necessarily like this big bodied wide receiver that's going to box you out. Like, he wins in so many different ways that I think are going to translate to the NFL. It really is just a question of health. And I think that that's generally speaking going to be, hard to assess this early on in his career.
I'm officially getting a little worried about Ladd.
Really?
Well, it's just because.
Is it the culmination of all these factors together?
Yeah, I think it's just that he hasn't had like a big injury yet. I mean, knock on wood, right? Like he has not had a major injury in the way that like Jonathon Brooks has. But it's like all these little injuries that are piling up, and it just seems like he can't go a couple weeks of practice without getting banged up. And now I think Jim Harbaugh said he's dealing with some kind of lower body injury. I'm not out on Ladd McConkey because I could never be out on Ladd McConkey, but I'm nervous. Okay. It feels a little bit like Christian Watson to me, but in a different sense of like this, we know this player is very talented, but you just hold your breath every single practice. Like, is he going to be able to make it through a practice and make it through a game? I'm already so heavily invested in Ladd McConkey that I can't really go out and buy more. And that's kind of my thought process now. Like if I don't have Ladd in my leagues, I don't know that I'm actively going out to buy him because I want to see him stay healthy for like 5, 6, 7 weeks straight before I invest even more draft capital into him or whatever you need to go out and get him.
Well, yeah, and I think that's fair. That's probably the best way to point, to express my overall feelings about Ladd. If I don't have him, which I do have him in many leagues, if I don't have him, I'm probably not going to run out, but I'm also not panic selling either. I'm just going to hold him, and because I'm a believer in the talent. You made the comparison to Christian Watson. He made some concerted efforts this offseason to figure out what was the deal with these ongoing health issues. And we don't know, maybe he has figured it out to this point, but I'm also going to counter you on that comparison there to the fact that Ladd McConkey coming out of Georgia was just a better wide receiver. Christian Watson had plenty of upside. He is a big, fast maniac, but Ladd McConkey, a smaller, fast maniac who can separate, I think has much more refined wide receiver skills overall. I just think the floor is a lot safer for a guy like Ladd McConkey than it is for Christian Watson, even with the injury considerations. But I understand the hesitation because it's not just the Ladd McConkey injury. It's also the Justin Herbert injuries. Yeah. It's also the questions about what this offense is going to even look like. And if there is going to be, a true wide receiver one that emerges in what we project to be a very run heavy offense.
It just bums me out. I wish Ladd could stay healthier because his game, I think, translates so well to the NFL, this inside-outside game. And I think he fits really well with Justin Herbert, but it's just this dark cloud over this Chargers franchise where these guys, they have these really talented players that just can't stay healthy, whether it was Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Joey Bosa, Derwin James, now Justin Herbert, and now Ladd. It's just, and I know I don't want to put it all on the franchise, but it just seems like they've got these really good players. They just can't stay healthy all the time. I don't know. I'm probably being a little bit too pessimistic here, but I really want to see Ladd like stay healthy for a whole month before I invest any more into him. That's
just
all.
a month. That's not so much to ask, but I mean, pound for pound, like the level of talent in this kid. He wasn't a Marvin Harrison Jr. He wasn't a Malik Neighbors, but I had him as my wide receiver 5 in this class. And there were times I've teetered him between wide receiver 4 and wide receiver 5. He does have a very good quarterback. The potential is there for this offense to, like we point to, Arthur Smith's offense in Tennessee, right? Very run heavy, but that created a lot of efficiency in the passing game. Like I can paint the pictures in my head where we're just blowing everything out of proportion, but
Yeah.
There are enough question marks that I understand maybe not chasing the dip right at this moment.
On Dynasty League football, going into the month of July, he was being drafted as wide receiver 33. I got to imagine that's dropping pretty significantly. We'll get some updated ADP over the next week or so, but I just want to run through some names that are currently being drafted after him, and you tell me where you land. Keon Coleman, wide receiver 34.
Oh, Ladd.
I think I'm going Coleman.
Okay.
Jaden Reed, wide receiver 35.
Ooh, I probably still stick with Ladd.
Okay. Cooper Kupp, wide receiver 36.
Ladd.
I think I'll go Kupp.
I guess it depends probably closer to what are you in a
Correct.
win now versus, yeah.
Well, and for that reason, let's take away like Amari Cooper, who I think is the same conversation. Rashee Rice, wide receiver 39.
I'll
Rashee.
probably take Ladd. I think I'm taking Ladd over all of those guys. And yeah, like again, I don't think his value is really moving for me. It's just I'm going to halt any movement in his perceived value in my brain until we get some more answers to all of those ancillary questions that I just mentioned that aren't just about his health, but other things from beyond that perspective that could.
It would also be nice.
It
would also be nice to know exactly what injury he has. Like, is it a major one? Is it just like a maintenance thing? Like, if they had a game on Sunday, could he play? Are the Chargers just being cautious here? Like, I feel like we need some more information before we make big decisions when it comes to Ladd McConkey in our dynasty leagues. Okay, let's talk about one of your all-time favorite players, Zack Moss, and why his ADP is dropping. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to make sure that you have quality candidates and professionals that are right for the job. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you hire the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day. Maybe you never skip your morning walk, Or maybe you just don't skip your therapy day, because when your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. But even though we know that it makes us happy to go on that morning walk or go to the gym, it's sometimes hard to make time for it. But when we feel like we're down and we have no time for ourselves, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever before. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. And all you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And you could switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Never skip a therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Every dayers on Monday, Kate and I will react to all of the biggest news from week one of the preseason. We'll discuss some winners, some losers, so make sure you tune in for that. But Kate, let's talk about Zack Moss, our favorite running back for the Cincinnati Bengals. His ADP has dropped 8 spots over the last 8 days, over the last 7 days. He's down 16 spots over the last 2 weeks on ESPN fantasy leagues. First of all, why is there a drop, and are you still buying him now?
I'm going to be honest. I think the drop is kind of interesting and unusual, just a little bit. I understand there's a lot of excitement for Chase Brown, who is the more explosive and perhaps more fun running back to watch on any given down. You know that he's got both the size and speed component, which is very enticing. But I have to say, look at their rushing production last year, and even in a pretty limited sample size for Chase Brown, which, it's going to be hard for him to earn some carries from a veteran like, Joe Mixon. But all things considered, I mean, Chase Brown wasn't even overly efficient with the carries that he had last year. Zack Moss is the better running back across the board in terms of what he offers in short yardage situations. Last year, when you had, carries up to 4 yards out, Zack Moss was the better running back, averaged 4.6 yards per carry on carries that were, 4 or fewer yards away from a first down. Chase Brown had 5 such attempts, managed 3 total rushing yards on those attempts. Zack Moss managed 5 rushing touchdowns on such carries. I'm guessing you can figure out what Chase Brown's stat line is there. Yes, he had 0 rushing touchdowns on such carries, average 0.6 yards per carry in those short yardage situations. I understand the hype for Chase Brown, but from what I'm reading at training camp, it seems like the consensus among beat reporters is that Zack Moss is also a very good fit for this offensive scheme. I think that these guys are 2 very different running backs that offer very different things. But when we're talking about the fantasy value specifically, Zack Moss's skill set translates a lot more to high value touches, especially around the goal line in these crucial situations of gameplay, than Chase Brown. Like, they had Chase Brown on the roster, and guess what? They wouldn't allow him near the goal line. And it's because, for every breakaway potential run he has, he gets stuffed quite often. And I think that's kind of an underrated aspect. Maybe it's almost like the Saquon Barkley effect, where you get so enamored by what is the upside that you're willing to ignore a lot of the badness in between. But that's kind of how I'm viewing Chase Brown at this point. I just think Zack Moss much more consistent.
Yeah, and I saw a report yesterday, or I believe it might have been on Tuesday now, where Zack Moss scored 3 touchdowns in 5 plays. They were doing some goal line stuff, and he was the clear-cut goal line running back. I just think Zack Moss isn't sexy, right? He's just not a player that
Sorry, Zach, if you're listening.
Well, except for you. I mean, you love Zack Moss, but he's just not a player that you're overly excited to draft, right?
Yeah.
But Chase Brown is, because there's maybe he's the next Austin Eckler, right? Or Tony Pollard, to name the running back that you want to name. I think Zack Moss is more in the David Montgomery style of running back, and it's just not a super fun player to draft. And without a lot of like big training camp highlights and videos that go viral on social media, I can understand why his value has gone down, but I still like drafting him because I like having a solid RB2 on an offense that I think is going to be much more improved this year, and behind an offensive line that I think should be better. He is one that I really like. So I'm good. I like this one quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm buying, which probably again isn't any surprise. And I'm not even saying there's not a world where these two don't split the backfield 50-50. But I think even if they do, looking at the fact that, Zack Moss clearly kind of profiles as that goal line back, much more effective in that role. And the fact that, like, again, they are very different styles of running back. Zack Moss can be more of a physical runner, more of a yards after contact guy, where Chase Brown, despite the fact that he's still got this big frame, he's more of the speed, explosive back. So, like, their play styles are so different that
Couldn't
I
be
do
more
think
different.
there's room for both of these guys to carve out their own unique role in this offense without stepping heavily on the toes of the other. But again, goal line work is everything, especially in an offense that we're projecting to take a big step back forward or back forward. I don't. Yeah, they're going to bounce back with Joe Burrow healthy. They got T. Higgins hopefully healthy and in a contract year ready to prove himself. Like, there are a lot of reasons to like this Bengals offense, and a big part of that for me in terms of fantasy upside and potential value is what we're seeing in Zack Moss. I get it. I feel like Zack Moss is probably one of the most hated fantasy assets, and I probably made him the most hated fantasy asset for all of my hype for him. Just, wearing people down over the years, but it's hard to argue. Follow the money, follow the goal line carries, follow whatever you want. It still leads back to Zack Moss.
Right now, Zack Moss is being drafted as RB 39 in Dynasty leagues, 125 overall. I just feel like that's a massive value. Like, that's maybe a lower end RB2, maybe, that you can get for almost nothing. I love the idea of grabbing Zack Moss late because, okay, would it surprise you if he is like, again, this could be very unspectacular, right? Like, he's averaging 4.1 yards per carry, but gets to 1,000 rushing yards and like 11 touchdowns. And all of a sudden he's RB 14 on the year. Like, that won't shock me in the least bit.
No. And Marcus, I know we're finally getting on the same page because I don't think I've heard you talk this positively about Zack Moss all off season long. So, like, I know we're finally starting to hit our stride, and I'm being maybe, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like a little bit of a homer when I'm evaluating Zack Moss. I feel a little bit more objective now that I have you to validate some of these ideas. And
I just like him better. I thought when he was in Buffalo, oh my God, this just isn't going to work. And then he found a really good situation in Indy. And now I think he's in the best situation yet with the Bengals. So I think we're on this upward trajectory for him that I guess I just didn't anticipate.
I am so happy to hear that. And again, this is kind of a little bit of a renaissance. It's a late breakout, but even if you get Zack Moss, let's say you get 1 year out of him as the RB 14, and you're getting him, somewhere around the 100th pick in a startup draft, I feel like that's pretty great return because most
pick
of the
125
time,
in a startup.
Drafting,
pick 125 in a startup.
Pick 120. Yeah, pick 125 in a startup draft. Smash, because we always say, unless we're talking about, this top tier 1 running backs, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, like, we're looking at the rest of the field as these 1 year type loaners. Like, yeah, give me Zack Moss, year 1 loaner, and I will reap the benefits.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen today. Now go listen to the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insights to the best fantasy draft strategies so that you can win your redraft leagues this season. You can find the link to the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast in this description. We're making it easy. You don't even have to go search. It's right there. Click on it. Go listen. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Go download the Locked On Dynasty Football podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. You can go follow the show on YouTube as well. You can follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. You can also read her at Yahoo Fantasy. I'm at Marcus _Mosher. Enjoy your weekend, and we will see you right back here on Monday.